This is my 125th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part will be about my efforts to restore the Hornby Dublo breakdown crane that I bought at the recent Great British Train Show here in Ontario, Canada, to operating condition. For a general overview of the history, engineering and modelling of railway cranes, please see my prior video on railway cranes part 123. When I bought this model, there were various problems with it. Only 2 of the 4 jacks were present, and the crane hook was entirely missing. The crane wasn't rigged with cables or chains to lift the jib or the hook at all, and there were other more subtle problems. For example, the restraining spring for the jib winder was present but out of place. Here's a close-up of the 2 winding axles. The one at the left with the handle on the far side is intended to operate the jib. The one on the right with the handle on the near side is intended to operate the hook. The one on the left is the one with the spring out of place. You can see the one nearer to you, there's a spring pressing against the winder, whereas on the other side the spring is just flopping about because its piece that's supposed to press against the winder has come out and isn't behind the winder. The spring is supposed to be behind the winder at the left so that it can press on the flats on the winder and prevent the winder from rotating freely, but somehow the spring has got out from behind the winder, and so it was doing nothing useful. There were also various bits of thread here and there, but nothing usefully connected up. I cut away the remnants of the old thread in preparation for re-rigging the crane. I did consider using chain, which is used on the newer Hornby breakdown cranes, and I even picked up some fine chain from a local craft store, but I ultimately decided to re-rig this crane with thread, as that was apparently what was originally used for these Hornby Dublo models, and later breakdown cranes did generally use cable rather than chain, and cable is more accurately, obviously, modelled using thread. I cut away the old thread from the winders, but that still left me with the problem of the restraining spring for the jib winder being out of place. I couldn't really figure out how anyone had actually managed to get the spring out of place like this, as I couldn't get the arm of the spring past the winder no matter what I did. I did finally manage to get the spring back in place as shown here, with the right-hand arm of the spring inside and pressing on the flat of the winder, but to do this I had to push the pin holding the spring in place out of the side of the crane, which wasn't that easy to do. I had to sort of get in with a small flat-headed screwdriver and lever it out. Then I was able to reposition the spring and push the pin back in. With the spring now properly pressing on the flats on the jib winder as shown here, I was now ready to re-rig the crane. I used Crawford's 4-ply waxed linen thread, which I had on hand because I use it for whipping antique wooden-shafted golf clubs. I started by tying a loop of the thread round the top of the crane cabin. Then I drew that loop in around the cabin supports and cut the thread off to a suitable length, leaving enough to go to the end of the jib and back to the winder. I passed the thread under the bar on the end of the jib and pulled it back so that it was now ready to support and lift the jib. The thread now needed to be attached to the winder. I passed the thread through the hole in the end of the winder. Then I tied the thread off to the winder at the hole. With the excess thread cut off, I was now able to use the winder to raise the jib. I could have passed a single thread from the winder to the bar at the end of the jib, but I preferred to have a doubled thread running round the bar, as this offers leverage, as winding 1 inch onto the winder will only reduce the thread to the end of the jib by ½ inch. This means that there's more leverage and the thread is less likely to defeat the retaining spring and come off the winder. In reality, breakdown cranes in the 1930s generally had a complex system of pulleys, so that the cable to the jib end was multiplied 10 times or more, so providing leverage and reducing the force that was required from the engine in order to lift the jib. At least initially, I thought I could use this zip puller that I had lying around as a hook for the crane. I used a cutting disc on a rotary tool to cut through the zip puller, converting the loop into a hook and removing the thread and plastic parts from the puller. I tied waxed linen thread round the bar at the base of the jib. I pulled that loop tight and cut off the excess. Then I passed the thread over the top of the jib. I passed the thread through the body of my improvised hook and then passed the thread up and over the pulley on the end of the jib. Then I passed the thread back down and under the bar at the base of the jib. Finally, I passed the end of the thread through the hole in the winder, tied it off, and cut off the excess. I was now able to wind thread onto the hook winder and lift the hook, although since the hook was very light, it didn't really hold the thread straight very well. That's one of the advantages of using chain. It'll hang straight much more readily than thread will. With my rigging basically done, I inserted the 2 jacks that came with the crane into the front 2 holes of the crane frame and screwed down the jack screws to support the front of the crane. Then I attached the hook to the bar of the crane's own match truck. I was able to lift this using my rigging, but the improvised hook looked pretty odd as the hook part came away from the body at a weird angle. To improve that, I used CA glue to fasten the hook to the body so that it couldn't come away. This did make the hook hang in a more reasonable straight way when supporting a load. Next, I wanted to try to make jacks to replace the 2 that were missing. I bought some 2mm styrene sheet and some screws for this purpose. I started by drawing round one of the jacks that came with the crane on the 2mm styrene sheet. Here's the outline of the jack shape that was produced. Of course, since it's drawn round the outside, it's a little bigger than the actual jack. I wanted to cut that shape out from the styrene sheet, but that proved to be quite difficult. I started out using a sharp craft knife, but I couldn't really make that go right through the 2mm styrene sheet, even with multiple passes and as much pressure as I could apply. I brought a piece of scrap chipboard up to the bench as I didn't want to damage my cutting mat in my attempts to cut through the styrene sheet. I found it very difficult to cut right through the 2mm styrene sheet. I tried my heated knife, but that didn't seem to work very well for this. I finally managed to cut a piece out using a combination of the craft knife, a razor saw, and a cutting disc in a rotary tool. Having cut out one piece, I drew round that to make a second piece, because I needed the width to be, well, the width of the original was just under 5mm, so I was planning to glue together 3 pieces of this 2mm styrene to create something about the right width. The rotary tool was by far the quickest way of cutting the styrene sheet, but it melted the plastic, making a lot of mess, and of course you had to be careful to control it. I held the pieces in pliers whilst I was doing it, so my fingers weren't anywhere near the cutting disc. Now I had 2 pieces of approximately the right shape. I cut a third piece and glued them all together using polycement, making a block about 6 millimeters thick. Then I used an emery board and a flat file to file down the resulting 3-layered piece. The most critical point was that the top needed to fit into the slot in the side of the crane. The rest of the shape could be a bit more approximate without causing major problems. When I bought the styrene sheet from a local hobby store, I also bought some socket head screws. I actually bought these and some slightly bigger ones as I wasn't sure about the size, but these 2.5mm by 15mm ones seemed to be pretty close to the screws used in the original jacks. I used a 2mm bit in a pin vise to drill a hole in the base of my improvised jack body. At this point, it seemed that I had something that would approximate pretty closely to the original jacks. I painted my first improvised jack black. I didn't paint the part that needed to insert into the slot in the crane, as I thought that paint might interfere with the fit there. For my second attempt at making a jack, I decided that rather than cutting out 3 pieces and then gluing them together, I would first glue 3 pieces of sheet together and then cut out the jack shape from that block. I cut 3 pieces of sheet large enough to easily accommodate the shape of the jack. Cutting rectangles like this is fairly easy, as it can be done by just cutting part way through with a knife and then bending the sheet to snap it along the straight cut. I then glued those 3 pieces together, using plenty of glue to make a solid block. Then I marked the jack shape onto that block. I cut through the block using the cutting disc on the rotary tool. It made a terrible mess due to melting the plastic, but that froth was relatively easy to clean off with a knife. I finished off cutting out the piece using a razor saw and a craft knife. This did produce an approximation to the shape required for the jack more quickly than the way I used for the first one. Once the approximate piece was produced, I needed to more accurately shape it by sanding and filing. The only really critical fit is at the top of the jack, where it must fit into the slot in the crane body. Once the top fitted, I painted the second jack black. I coloured the tops of the jacks with a permanent marker, as this seemed less likely to affect the fit. I screwed my bolts into the holes in the bases of my improvised jacks using a 2mm hex driver. Because the holes were only a little smaller than the bolts, they were able to self-tap through the plastic. Here's a close-up of my finished jacks. Not perfect, but a reasonable functional approximation. Here's the crane lifting a load, supported by my jacks at the front and the original ones at the rear. Here's another view. My jacks don't look exactly like the originals, but I think they don't look too bad. Mine are a bit oversized, so they reach rather lower down than the originals, but the adjusting screws allow for the crane to be held level using both types of jacks. I did want to be able to carry the jacks on the bogie trucks, not that they would really have been carried like that, but this model was designed to carry them that way. In order to fit my jacks onto the bogie trucks, I needed to thin down the central arm of one of them a bit, as seen here. So then I had to colour that jack again as I cut down into the white plastic, thinning it down. Here are both bogie trucks carrying my jacks and the original ones. And here is the whole crane hooked up, ready to run, now with rigging and with all 4 jacks. Next, I tried the crane on my test track. It's critical that the jib rests right down on the bar on the match truck in the middle, so that the 2 nubs on the bar will hold the jib in place as the crane is taken round bends in the track. As you can see here, I've now doubled my little test track. I figured that I might as well do this, as it had some extra convenience in testing multiple things, and I had some flex track left over from building my shelf layout. The test controller that I was using also provided for controlling 2 tracks, so I just had to make up connecting wires to connect the second track. I initially tried moving the crane back and forth on the test track using a little Lima diesel shunter, basically because it was there beside the test track. Not a great engine, but good enough for this. The crane didn't prove to be the freest running assembly of rolling stock, but it was possible to push and pull it back and forth on the test track. I got the crane onto my main Hornby layout to try running it. I hooked it up behind a Hornby Dublo Ginty initially. Not the greatest engine. In fact, I had to do a bit of service on it to get it to do this job at all. The Simplex couplings on the crane seemed to be rather high mounted, and I had trouble getting them to couple to other rolling stock with Simplex couplings. I only had one coach with a Simplex coupling, and that wouldn't couple reliably to the crane at all, so I hooked up a Hornby Dublo brake van behind instead. The handles on the crane's winders proved to be a problem. They stuck out a long way on either side of the track, so they tended to hit signals and station fittings, etc. I did my best to run the crane round the outer circuit of my main Hornby layout like this, but it was rather a struggle with the winder handles hitting things.
Well, I wanted to see what I can try and do about running this Hornby Dublo crane, but it's got distinct problems. I'm trying to run it behind the Hornby Dublo Ginty. Well, that had problems as well. I had to service that. It just wasn't running at all. But I think I've got that running now. I've only got one coach with a Simplex coupling on, and it wouldn't couple behind that. It just wasn't at the right height, and whatever, it wouldn't do it. So I've got a brake van, which does have a famous... Oh, come on, focus, for goodness sake. I don't know, it doesn't want to focus, does it, there? That brake van's coupled on with a Simplex coupling. It should be okay. But the big problem we got is these... See these handles that the crane has on? It has these handles for cranking the jib and things. And they just stick way the heck out. The one on the outside was sticking up. It was sticking up so far that it was hitting the canopy on the station over there. It was hitting that station canopy. I got around that simply by putting it down. But, you know, this is hardly an ideal situation. The one on the other side still hits the signal posts there. So, So I can't really run the thing round. I mean, we can start it off, famous last words, well, we could start it off if the Hornby Ginty would consent to go. Yes, there we go. It's still, I just serviced the Hornby Ginty, but it's still not very enthusiastic about going. But the problem is, I'm gonna have to stop it when I get round here, because he's going to hit the signal. Ow. Oh, come here, I'm trying to drag the... And of course, every time I stop the Hornby Ginty, it doesn't want to start again. Oh, he's still stuck on the ladder. I got by that one. So I have to sort of stand here and push the signals out of the way. That's the only way I can get it round. See if I can do that. But trying to do that whilst holding the camera and the handheld controller. Whoa! Oh! And I just knocked the whole train off. See, I'm trying to do too many things at once. It's ridiculous. Actually, he seems to be getting by the other signal now, because I didn't move that one. But he won't get by this signal. He won't get by this signal, so I have to keep pushing that signal over to one side so he can get by. Well, I think that's about as much as I'm going to do, because I want to pick up the train I knocked down. I hope we haven't damaged anything. Well, I don't think it was an engine, it was just some carriages that were on the siding. So there you go. The Dublo crane is sort of restored, but trying to actually see if it sticks out so far, trying to get it to actually run on the layout's a bit like hard work.
I thought that the crane might possibly run better on the inner loop of the layout, so I cleared the inner loop and then moved the crane over the crossover point. This proved to be a bit of a problem as the winding handle hit the signal beside the crossover. Here's a close-up of the problem. These handles stick out so far that they tend to hit things like signal posts and ladders that aren't very far from the track. Nevertheless, I did manage to get the crane onto the inner loop. The Dublo Ginty was having real trouble pulling the crane, so I tried a Triang 4F, but that was even worse, getting stuck and spinning its wheels when trying to pull the crane round curves. I guess it just didn't have enough traction. I don't have many locos with Simplex couplings, as I mainly use the more modern tension lock couplings. I did finally manage to pull the crane on the inner loop using my Wren 264 tank engine, although the crane didn't want to stay coupled as its couplings were at a different height to those on the loco.
Okay, I'm going to have one more try. I've now got the crane railed up beside the Wren, I don't know what to call it, 264 tank. We could sort of pretend it's a Stania tank. I think it's actually modelled on a British Railways 4MT, and they've just painted it in LMS colours. It's also painted as a passenger engine in crimson, which is not ideal for this, but it's by far the strongest Simplex coupled engine I've got. I gave up. I've moved the crane onto the inner track, but I was having great trouble getting the little Dublo Ginty to move it round, and then I tried the 4F, and that couldn't really manage it either, so let's see if this will work. I also had trouble getting it to couple to this, because even Simplex couplings can be iffy. The Simplex couplings on this crane, for some reason, seem to be rather high, and they don't couple well with other things. Yep. Okay, so there we go. Oh, and he's come uncoupled again. See, this is the problem. He doesn't want to stay coupled. Oh, for goodness sake. And now I've derailed him. Okay, I'll have one more try at adjusting that coupling. Okay, one more try. I've tried to get those couplings at the same level again. He is going to, we're sort of getting him round, although he's going to hit that signal. Oh, famous last words. I didn't actually see him hit the signal then, but I think he did. I don't know. Well, anyway, there you go. He's actually gone round a couple of circuits. Oh, I can't even reach the zoom because I got hold of the camera too quickly. Well, we got him round a couple of circuits. Required a great deal of mucking around to do. Well, I don't think he's even hitting that signal anymore. Maybe he's just knocked it across far enough that he doesn't hit it anymore. I keep getting confused. This train's actually, although it looks as if it's going forwards, it's going backwards for the line because the crane was railed on the other line originally, so it was railed to go the other way. Well, it is going round. I don't even see it. No, I don't see that signal moving anymore. Famous last word. So that's the best I can do, really, in terms of actually running this Hornby Dublo crane. But, no, we did get it to run round a few times finally behind the Wren engine. Okay, just for completeness, let's see if I can actually get this plane to lift something on camera. Now I've put the jacks in already because it's just too fiddly to do on camera, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's raise the jib a bit further. It sort of raises in jumps, this one, because it holds it in 180-degree positions. Okay. So we raise the jib. Now we want to lower, famous last words, the hook somewhat. Getting the hook to come out is not easy. Yeah, that's a problem with the hook. It seems like the way I've got the hook threaded, it doesn't really want to go down. I mean, I can get it to go up, but trying to get the hook to go down is not easy. Well, there it's going now. I got it moving now. I don't know why it wasn't moving at first. Okay, I'm going to have to move this wagon a bit closer. Okay, famous last words, and lower the hook a little bit more. Now, you got to famous last words, we're going to lower the hook even more. See, now the hook is sticking again. Why? I haven't quite figured out why the hook sticks sometimes. Sometimes it moves, and sometimes it sticks. It is waxed thread, which probably doesn't help. Okay, now you've got to imagine a crew of little men crawling round on top of this wagon, hooking this harness on, putting this harness onto the hook, which I don't think I can do. Oh. See, I'm trying to put the harness, the hook onto the harness in the middle, and it's hard to do. There, maybe that's on. Maybe. Got tweezers, but then I didn't use them. Okay. So now, let's try and hoist the hook again. The hook does not move very smoothly, we must admit, especially not with that little weight on it. Okay. Then we swing over, and we'll maybe lower the jib because it's raising it. It's easier to lower the jib than it is to lower the hook. The jib moves more smoothly than the hook. And there you go. We've dropped the wagon on the other side, sort of. And then our little men have to release the hook, which of course is next to impossible to do. I don't know. Trying to extract the hook. There we go. Ooh. And once you've extracted the hook, then you can bring the crane back and lower the jib even further, but and the hook, I don't know, and the hook's supposed to lie down there, and we lower the jib basically all the way onto the jib wagon. Well, there you go. Yes, I mean, trying to actually operate these cranes really is pretty difficult, but still, you know, I'm not really too displeased with the results of this exercise, at least. I've got the camera on a tripod, but I'm just turning it now on the tripod. So there you go. For what it's worth, my restored Hornby Dublo breakdown crane.
So there we are. This old Hornby Dublo crane is more or less working and running on my layout, albeit with some difficulty. I did wonder about trying to repaint this crane grey. What do you think? I'd prefer it in grey, but it could be a bit tricky to paint as the rotating body is held onto the base by a rivet and so can't really be removed. Perhaps I should just leave it as it is. I'm not too happy about that hook made from a zipper either, but it does basically work and I'm not sure offhand quite what else to try, so I guess it'll stay for now.